277 in your songbook. We'll sing the first and last stanza of Trust and Obey. Remain seated as we sing Trust and Obey, song number 277. 277. When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, remain seated as we sing Trust and Obey, the first and last stanza, 277. Ready? When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. While we do his good will, he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey. Change offering. Go ahead, guys, and we'll have Brother Haster come and lead us in the Sunday school hour this morning. Thank you so much for being here in church this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Excuse me while I chew on a cough drop. Let's open with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to continue looking into your word, comparing things that may not seem familiar to us according to the culture of Bible times. We ask for your guidance in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, as we continue looking at things that are different between Bible times and today, words that may seem different or have a different meaning. We're continuing in commerce and occupations, and today we'll start with an artificer. An artificer. Look at Genesis chapter 4 and verse 19. Genesis 4 and verse 19. As in reading this passage and the associated passages with it, it's easy to get confused between some of the people being talked about because the names are the same. Today we're talking about descendants of Cain, not descendants of Seth. The passages around this area have like Lamech, who we're more familiar with as being the son of Methuselah, father of Noah. And further on in the passage, it talks about other people with the same names, but they're from two different lines, so try not to be confused with them. But in Genesis 4:19, it starts off, and Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Adah, the name of the other Zillah. And Adah bare Jubal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and the organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Tubal-Cain was a great-great-grandson of Cain, and he was an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. Artificer. His half-brother Jubal was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. Now, harp refers to reed instruments, any instrument where air had to be blown through. If you think of the real old organs where they used to have a person sitting next to it operating bellows to force the air through the organ before we had electricity and little motors to do that. Now, tools and metalworking were required for the construction of these instruments. You had to have the instruments made, and therefore the smith's art of Tubal-Cain must have been needed before these instruments could be made. So Tubal-Cain's work in metal preceded his half-brother looking at this and saying, hey, Tubal, if you make that into a little round circle and put some reeds at one end, we could make music with it. So, and of course his brother Tubal said, keep your hands off my metal, I don't want to do this. No, I'm just thinking of normal siblings, they don't help each other. But so Tubal made the instruments or worked them to Jubal's design. Now, an artificer is a skilled or artistic craftsman. He's a craftsman. He's just not a worker with these metals. He's a craftsman. He can design, he can come up with ideas. He was a craftsman. What he did would be very, very good. So he's one that makes or invents something. Now, Tubal-Cain was not only a skilled craftsman, but he taught his craft to others. There are a lot of people who are very good at something, but they don't want to tell someone else how to do it for fear that they'll become better than they are. But Tubal-Cain taught his craft. And the text seems to intimate that great and important discoveries in the working of metal were made by him, rather than he was just the first person to apply any use to them. So he discovered different ways to work with the metal. He is not, like his half-brother Jubal, called the father or originator of the art that he taught. He's not the originator, but he became very, very good at it, and he instructed those who also worked in it. Certainly, whatever was the precise nature and extent of Tubal-Cain's inventions in metallurgy, they were of such great use and service to mankind as rendered him famous in his day and attached distinction to his name in all succeeding generations. So we go from the craftsmen, the artificers, to masons. Now, masons, the Hebrew word, means hewers of the stone of the wall. Hewers of the stone of the wall. Many homes were made of stone, and you would need people to hack the stone out of the quarry, put it in place the right way, and they became known as masons. Examples of masons would be David's palace about the year 1040 BC. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 5. 2 Samuel 5 and verse 11. Second Samuel 5:11 says, and Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and carpenters, and masons, and they built David an house. We get almost the exact same wording in 1 Chronicles 14:1. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and timber of cedars with masons and carpenters to build him an house. So we learn that the masons employed on King David's house or palace were sent by Hiram, king of Tyre. King of Tyre. So at this time of history, the Israelites evidently had little skill in architecture. They were primarily agriculture people. So they didn't have much skill in architecture, since the influx of Tyrian architects and craftsmen relied both for this palace for David and later for the temple, for the palace and for the temple, gives evidence of the lowest state to which, through long continued war and other things, the better class of artisans had declined in Israel. There were people who could do the basic work, but they had no one who could really do it great. And when you're building a palace for a king or a temple for the Lord, you want it all to be just right. So that was for the palace. Now around the same time, maybe a few years later, 1 Chronicles 22:2 tells us, David commanded to gather together the strangers that were in the land of Israel, the people from Tyre most likely, and he set masons to hew wrought stones to build the house of God. Now, David, besides his own palace, also desired to build God a house, but he was denied by God. David thought it was a great idea. What could be better than to honor God, building him a place to put the ark in and a place to come and adore him? Even the prophet Nathan thought it was a good idea, but then God said, no, you're not to do it, David. No matter how good of an idea it is, no matter how great of an honor it would be for me, you're not to do it. We're going to let Solomon do it. So David went off in the corner and pouted and ate worms and wanted nothing more to do with it. No, that's not what happened. David said, okay, God tells me no, not now. He's going to have someone else do it. So this work was to be done by David's son, Solomon. But David didn't just say, okay, fine, that's Solomon's problem now. No, David, in order to assist Solomon, began preparations. He began preparations. He was proactive by gathering materials that Solomon would need. Instead of waiting for the time when God said, okay, Solomon, start building the temple, and then Solomon would have to run around, okay, we got to get stone from the quarry, we got to get wood, we've got to get people in here to do it, we got to get money. David ahead of time began to gather all the things that were going to be needed. And eventually the temple would be built, and it would be a great edifice. But then a couple of hundred years later, Joash reigns and repairs the temple of Solomon. Any building that stands for a length of time is going to need to be repaired, especially if it's subject to great neglect and abuse. Now, at the time of Joash, Queen Athaliah, the grandmother of Joash, set up Baal worship in Jerusalem. Set up Baal worship. And she killed all the royal family. She didn't want any competitors for her throne. However, the infant Joash was hidden in the temple by his aunt. He was hidden in the temple. We talked about that when we talked about the furnishings in houses of Israel, where Joash and his aunt we're told were hidden in the bedchamber, which is the closet that they kept the mattresses until evening, when they would bring them out and put them on the floor to sleep on. And then later he was moved into the temple. And because the temple was not in great use anymore because of Baal worship and a lot of things that were going on, the temple was a fairly safe place to hide him. Nobody paid any attention, because not only was there Joash, but there was sons and daughters of the ladies of the harem running around the palace and the temple grounds. So you really had no idea who any of these children were. So 6 years passed, and the iron hand of Athaliah still kept the people in subjection. And the sons of Athaliah had damaged the house of God, and the priests had not taken care to repair it. Sometimes it's just, well, I'm not going to repair it because the sons are just going to come back and damage it. Other times it's a system of, oh yeah, there's some damage there that needs to be fixed. But we've all probably experienced we see something in our house that needs to be fixed, but then after time we get used to it being there and we kind of forget about it. Well, look at 2 Kings chapter 12. 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 4. And most likely, in defense of the priests, they probably didn't have the talent to repair the temple. 2 Kings chapter 4, 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 4. Jehoash gets put into power, deposes his grandmother. And in verse 4 we're told, Joash said to the priests, all the money of the dedicated things that is brought into the house of the Lord, even the money of everyone that passeth the account, the money that every man is set at, and all the money that cometh into any man's heart to bring into the house of the Lord, let the priests take it to them, every man of his acquaintance, and let them repair the breaches of the house, wheresoever any breach shall be found. But it was so that in the 23 year of King Jehoash, the priests had not repaired the breaches of the house. Then King Joash called for Jehoiada the priest and the other priests, and said unto them, why repaired ye not the breaches of the house? Now therefore receive no more money of your acquaintance, but deliver it for the breaches of the house. And the priest consented to receive no more money of the people, neither to repair the breaches of the house. So they said, fine, we won't take up any more money, but they still didn't get the temple repaired. But Jehoiada the priest, most likely the high priest, took a chest and bored a hole in the lid of it, and set it beside the altar on the right side, as one cometh into the house of the Lord. And the priests that kept the door put therein all the money that was brought into the house of the Lord. And it was so, when they saw that there was much money in the chest, that the king's scribe and the high priest came up, and they put up in bags and told the money that was found in the house of the Lord. And they gave the money, being told, into the hands of them that did the work, that had the oversight of the house of the Lord. And they laid it out to the carpenters and builders that wrought upon the house of the Lord, and to masons and hewers of stone, and to buy timber and hewed stone to repair the breaches of the house of the Lord, and for all that was laid out for the house to repair it. And we're also told similar passage in 2 Corinthians 24:12, and the king and Jehoiada gave it to such as did the work of the service of the house of the Lord, and hired masons. They hired masons and carpenters to repair the house of the Lord, and also such as wrought iron and brass to mend the house of the Lord. So again, these craftsmen were needed to get the repairs done in the temple. They were of such magnitude that it wasn't just take a little spackle and cover up the nail holes in the wall. It was, some major repairs, and they were finally done. Now we go on another 150, 200 years to Josiah. Look at 2 Kings 22. Second Kings 22, verse 1. And we have another young king, Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jedidiah, the daughter of Adaiah of Basketh. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, and walked in all the way of David his father, and turned not aside to the right hand or to the left. And it came to pass in the 18th year of King Josiah, that the king sent Shaphan, the son of Azaliah, the son of Meshullam, the scribe, to the house of the Lord, saying, Go up to Hilkiah the high priest, that he may sum the silver which is brought into the house of the Lord, which the keepers of the door have gathered of the people. And let them deliver it unto the hand of the doers of the work, that have the oversight of the house of the Lord, and let them give it to the doers of the work which is in the house of the Lord, to repair the breaches of the house, unto carpenters and builders and masons, and to buy timber and hewn stone to repair the house. So again, over a time of 150, 200 years, the temple again needed repairs, and money was raised to do this. Unfortunately, in a relatively short amount of time, the temple would be destroyed by the Babylonians. And most of the wealthy and talented people in Israel would be taken to Babylon and be there for 70 years. Then around 535 BC, they were allowed to return to Jerusalem. And in Ezra 3:7 we read, as they were going there to rebuild the temple, they gave money also unto the masons and to the carpenters, and meat and drink and oil unto them of Zidon and to them of Tyre, to bring cedar trees from Lebanon to the sea of Joppa, according to the grant that they had of Cyrus king of Persia. So again, they're going to rebuild the temple, the second temple, but again, they had to get masons, they had to get supplies from Tyre, because they didn't have the people that could do it there in Jerusalem. So those are the primary craftsmen that we see in the Bible and what they do. But then we get about 15 years later, we start talking about a bag with holes. Look at Haggai chapter 1. Haggai is the third last book of the Old Testament. Malachi is the last, Zechariah is the one before that, and Haggai is just before Zechariah. So you can go to the end of the Old Testament and go back just a couple of books, and you'll be at Haggai. And you'll find the Old Testament just before the New Testament. Okay, Haggai 1, verse 1. In the second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, in the first day of the month, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua the son of Josedek the high priest, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, The people say, The time is not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built. Then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? Now therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, Consider your ways. Ye have sown much, and bring in little. Ye eat, but ye have not enough. Ye drink, but ye are not filled with drink. Ye clothe you, but there is none warm. And he that earneth wages to put it into a bag with holes. Well, the background of this is Cyrus. Cyrus, the emperor of the Medo-Persian Empire, allowed the Jews to return to the land of Israel. And while all the Jews were allowed to return to Israel, only a minority chose to do so. A minority returned, what's known as the remnant. Most of them had been there almost 70 years, and they had set up their own new life. Some of them being born there, that's all they were used to. So they were quite comfortable in Babylon and didn't feel like making the trek all the way back across the deserts to Jerusalem, to a land that had been devastated. So the minority that returned began to rebuild the temple. Began to rebuild the temple. Initially, this was the priority. It was their priority. We're here to build the temple. But opposition arose from Gentiles. Gentiles and Samaritans, the half-Jews, and caused the authorities to order the building to cease. They wrote to the emperor and said, hey, they're going to rebel against you. They're fortifying themselves. So until things were settled, the authorities said, stop all the work. And then it was kind of forgotten by the authorities. So for 15 years, 15 years, the foundation lay there completed, but nothing more was done about it. For 15 years, people looked and saw this foundation, but there was no more building being done. And when Darius Hystaspes became the new emperor, there was no longer any royal opposition to it. No more royal opposition. He went, looked at the historic records and said, yes, Cyrus said, rebuild the temple. You've got to rebuild Jerusalem. So now the problem was no longer with the Gentiles, but with the Jewish people themselves. It was with the Jewish people themselves who weren't willing to rebuild. They had lost their zeal. They lost their zeal concerning the rebuilding of the temple. We see something similar in Revelation 2:4, where Jesus says, nevertheless, I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love. Thy first love. Their attention had been directed to other areas. And the book of Haggai makes two major points. Number one, true prophecy comes directly from God. Comes directly from God, not from people saying, I think, or I have a feeling that, or it seems like a good idea that we do such and such. True prophecy comes directly from God. Out of the 38 verses that make up the 2 chapters of this book, it says that the Lord was the one doing the speaking 20 times. 20 times. So most of the book of Haggai is verbally from the mouth of God. The second point is that procrastination is dangerous because of the judgment that could result from putting off what one knows to be the will of God. What one knows to be the will of God. And we know what is the will of God by reading the Bible. That tells us what we know to be the will of God. The people put off carrying out God's will, and as a result, they suffered divine judgment. Serious judgment came upon them. And Haggai dealt with this sin of the people in verse 2. He says, thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, the people say, the time is not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built. Now this might have been a valid excuse before the permission given by Darius. The authorities had said, hold off. But now that God had revealed his will for the people, it was no longer a valid excuse. A valid excuse. Most excuses are not valid. They're just excuses. There's a difference between a reason for doing or not doing something and an excuse for not doing something or doing something. They were doing what some believers do when they know what the Bible teaches about a certain thing, but they do not want to do what it says. They come up with, in quotes, spiritual excuses. Spiritual excuses that include, it is just not the right time. It's not time. Let's wait a while. We have not reached that stage yet. Let's not be proactive. Let's wait until we get right up against it, and then we'll scramble. Well, I simply do not feel. I do not feel led of the Lord to do so. Or similarly, I have not felt led to do so. I have not felt. The excuses are irrelevant. Once God has revealed his will, no special further leading is necessary. When you read, honor your father and your mother, you don't need further revelation to start honoring your parents. God will not lead in a special way to do something he has already commanded. He's not going to give you special revelation for something that's been commanded. The very command is the leading. The command is the leading right then and there. So God responded to their excuses by asking them a question in verses 3 and 4. Then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? The Hebrew word for sealed means paneled. Paneled. They had paneled houses. Most likely not only the walls, but also the ceiling. The sealed houses refer to houses that were paneled with expensive wood. This is the same word used primarily in connection with the building of the first temple. The Hebrew word appears frequently referring to the building of the first temple. So this suggests that the wood that was intended to be used to rebuild the second temple 15 years earlier had been taken by the people and used for the building of their private homes. Their private homes. Foundation lay there, nothing being done. There's all this wood and stone. And well, they don't want that wood to rot. Well, it was cedar, so it's not going to rot anytime soon. And so they said, well, I'm going to take it and put it in my own house. Most homes in the Old Testament period were not sealed or paneled houses because that was something only the rich people could afford. Most houses were simply blocks of stone or even dirt. Dirt houses, which we'll talk about next week, with some kind of plaster on the inside. They were dirt homes. So because of this, Haggai reminds them of the punishment of verses 5 and 6. Now therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Consider your ways. The Hebrew literally means place your heart and meditate on this. Meditate. Think deeply about what's been going on and what you're doing. They were to look back on the past 15 years and consider carefully what had happened. The returned exiles had been experiencing a series of bad seasons. Bad seasons. Things weren't going the way they had hoped they would. For years, their labor had lacked the divine blessing. Lacked the divine blessing. They had sown much and reaped little. Their money ran out as quickly as they earned it. A drought lay on all the land. A drought. Jerusalem was beginning to look like Yuma. Sand and dead things all over the place. Though they had fine houses to dwell in, the food which they ate did not satisfy them. They had these big, beautiful homes, but they certainly weren't filled with food. Their bodies were sickly. Their bodies were sickly. They had these big, beautiful homes, but they weren't healthy, and they derived no strength from the food which they took in. And maybe their poor health made their usual clothing insufficient to maintain their bodily heat in the winter. And God continues, ye have sown much and bring in little. Ye eat, but ye have not enough. Ye drink, but ye are not filled with drink. Ye clothe you, but there is none warm, and he that earneth wages to put it into a bag with holes. So there'd been an obvious lack of prosperity, and the reason for it was to be found in the neglected temple. The neglected temple, the purpose of returning to Jerusalem was to rebuild the temple. They got distracted. The expression, he that earneth wages to put it into a bag with holes, emphasizes that inflation was so bad that no matter how much they gained in wages, the wages left as quickly as they earned them. The crops were scarce, so the cost of crops was increased when you wanted to buy food. There was a shortage of everything, so everything was expensive. And this lack of productivity, the lack of clothing, lack of sufficient wages was something the Mosaic law said would happen if the people disobeyed. In Deuteronomy 28, 38-40, it tells us, "Thou shalt carry much seed out into the field, and shalt gather but little in, for the locust shall consume it." The locust. Popular little bug mentioned in the Bible. "Thou shalt plant vineyards and dress them, but shalt neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes, for the worms shall eat them." Before they're ready for harvest, the worms will have destroyed all the grapes. "Thou shalt have olive trees throughout all thy coasts, but thou shalt not anoint thyself with the oil, for thine olive shall cast his fruit." Shall cast. Before the olives are ripe and ready to be harvested, the tree will drop them all off, and they'll never mature and grow. So according to the Mosaic law, disobedience brought want. God had commanded the children of Israel, commanded them. It wasn't just, if you ever get around to it, you might want to think about rebuilding that temple. No, he commanded them to rebuild the temple, and they disobeyed him. They were in no hurry to repair the temple. These unfruitful seasons had visited them during all the continuance of their negligence. Through their negligence, as long as they neglected to build the temple, God was not blessing them. The meaning of these verses is not that the small harvest was insufficient to feed and clothe the people, but that even in their use of the little that they had been able to reap, the blessing of God was lacking, as evident not only from the words themselves, but placed beyond doubt by God himself. Look at verse 9. It says, "Ye looked for much, and lo, it came to little. And when ye brought it home, I did blow upon it." What little they had in their hands, the Lord would blow upon it, and like dandelion seed, just blow away. "Why, saith the Lord of hosts, because of mine house that is waste, and ye run every man into his own house." So in Bible times, the Old Testament and the New Testament, there was no folding money. There was no folding money. It was all hard coin. There was no need for someone to invent the modern wallet. Money was kept in a leather bag or purse. And purse comes from a word meaning leather bag. A bag with holes was proverbial for money gained but quickly gone. Today we say it burned a hole in his pocket. Gets money but doesn't hang on to it. How frequently our disasters and losses in business arise from our failure to remember God's causes. Remember God's cause. We use many excuses and see no necessity for setting apart the Lord's Day or the daily time for meditation and prayer. If we would see things as they really are, we should find that this is false economy, and it wastes. This wastes more than we save, whether in time, money, or blessings. It's a waste. Proverbs 11:24 tells us, "There is that scattereth, and yet increaseth, And there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. Tends to poverty. Unless we pay our debt to God first, put God first, and all these things will be added to you, we are apt to remain in debt to others. It always pays to obey God, to repair the temple, and to put first things first. Any questions or comments? Okay, we'll close in prayer. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this time to look into your word. Help us to remember, dear Lord, that if we know the commands of God and do not obey them, we cannot expect to be blessed and prosper. So help us, Lord, to be obedient. Help us, when things don't go our way, not to become petulant and have a pity party for ourselves, but to become proactive and prepare for the time that God does turn things around and allows things to happen for us. Be with us now and prepare our hearts for the morning service, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. You're dismissed.